Chapter 15. Crowding the Cities. Within the United States, during these same years after the Civil War, there was another great movement of people, from the country to the cities. When the Civil War began, only 1 American in 5 was living in a city. By 1915, cities had held half of all Americans, and this was only a beginning. They came from everywhere. First, they came from the countryside, while the railroad builders sent abroad their super salesmen boasting the wonders of American farms. Many American farmers were actually moving to the city. Older sections of New England offered visitors the sad spectacle of farms that had lost their farmers. Many deserted farm villages seemed relics of a departed civilization. A traveler to one such village saw an abandoned church and a school half taken apart for its lumber. There were only 2 inhabitants, one living on each side of a broad street. Some of these farmers had gone west, but most had gone to the cities. By 1910, more than a third of all people who were living in American cities had moved from American farms, many from the rural South. Of the 25 million immigrants who came to the United States between the Civil War and World War I, most stayed in the cities. Outside of cities, many of them would have felt lonely and lost. They loved the friendly bustle and wanted to be close to people like themselves, and some of them had no choice. They had spent everything to cross the ocean and had no money left for the trip west. Little immigrant cities grew up within the big American cities. By 1890, New York City held twice as many Irish as Dublin did. It held as many Germans as Hamburg and half as many Italians as Naples. And besides these, there were large numbers of Poles, Russians, Hungarians, Austrians, Norwegians, Swedes, and Chinese. 4 out of every 5 New Yorkers either were born abroad or were the children of foreign parents. The Germans and Irish who had come before 1880 were found nearly everywhere in the United States. There were also lots of Canadians in Boston and Detroit, Poles in Buffalo and Milwaukee, Austrians in Cleveland, and Italians in New Orleans. Cities were sometimes called the nation's melting pots. Perhaps they should have been called mixing bowls. The individual adult immigrant sometimes became Americanized only slowly, but his whole colony found its special place in American life rather quickly. Just as the new United States had first been made from 13 different colonies, now a great nation was being made from countless colonies of immigrants. In New York City, for example, there were separate colonies from different parts of Italy. Italians from Naples and Calabria lived around Mulberry Bend. Those from Genoa settled in Baxter Street, and Sicilians clustered about Elizabeth Street. Wherever you came from, you could find a neighborhood in New York or in another big city where you could feel at home. Whether you were from Germany, Italy, Hungary, or Poland, you could shop in your own old country language, buy familiar old country foods, and attend a church offering your old country services. By 1892, nearly 100 German-language newspapers were being published in American cities, and there were dailies in French, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Yiddish, and a dozen other languages as well. In the making of Americans, nothing was more important than the public schools. They were free, and the states passed laws that required all children to attend. It was in public schools that the children of Irish, German, Italian, and all sorts of other families learned, played, and sometimes fought together. Unlike their parents, who kept close within their own ethnic circle, these children from many different cultures mixed with one another every day. At home, many families spoke only Polish or Italian, but in school, everybody spoke English. Even if the parents spoke English with a foreign accent, soon the children sounded like all other Americans. And the children taught their parents. They not only taught them English, but all sorts of American customs. One little girl in New York City who had learned to use a toothbrush brought it home from school. She showed it to her mother, who had been born in a peasant hut in Poland and had never seen such a thing. Her mother, too, was soon brushing her teeth like an American. Although these immigrant colonies tried to keep separate, they could not stay separate forever. People from the different colonies became more and more alike. Children who stopped speaking their parents' language sometimes stopped going to their parents' churches. They were afraid to seem foreign. Then, too, a young man from Then, too, a young man from the Italian colony might marry a girl whose parents spoke German. In the city, people could not help feeling closer to one another. If the crowds were the joy of the city, crowding was the curse. Old world cities had grown mostly by children being born to the people already living there. The parents put a cradle in the room with their other children. As the family grew larger, everybody was more crowded. The American city was different. It grew by adding not just new children, but whole new families. Land was expensive in the crowded cities after the Civil War. Unless you were rich, you could not afford a private house. Still, the thousands who came pouring had to live somewhere. New York, the nation's biggest city, busiest seaport, and the magnet of the world's immigrants, was where the problem was worst. In New York, American know-how, which at the same time was building grand cast-iron palaces for department stores, produced another but unlikely American invention. This was the tenement house. New Yorkers, of course, did not invent the slum. European cities had their streets of ancient, rickety buildings and evil-smelling hovels where the poor were tumbled together. But in the years after the Civil War, New York City produced a new kind of slum, the tenement house slum. Most newcomers to the city could not afford to pay much rent. Back in the early years of the 1800s, the poorer people of New York lived in shacks on the swamps at the edge of Manhattan Island. But as the island filled with people, specially designed buildings went up for the city's new poor. A tenement house was a building 6 or 7 stories high, designed to hold the largest possible number of families. Landlords built these tenement houses together in deep, solid blocks. Their inside rooms had no windows or ventilation. There were also helter-skelter buildings of many other kinds. Then, in 1878, to help find something better, the plumber and sanitary engineer, a builder's magazine, announced a contest for architects. The editors offered a $500 prize for the best plan for tenement apartments for the poor. The winning plan was the dumbbell tenement. Looked at from above, the floor plan of the whole building was shaped like a dumbbell, and it had a good deal to be said for it compared with some of the flimsy fire traps that had been so common before. The dumbbell tenement, built of brick, was meant to be fireproof, but it was specifically designed to fit on a narrow lot 25 feet wide and 100 feet deep. It was 6 or 7 stories high, with a stairway running up the middle. 4 sets of apartments were on each floor, 2 in front and 2 in back. The front and back rooms got some light and air from their windows on the street. What was new about this plan was that the inside rooms were also supposed to get some light and air. The building was slightly narrower in the middle. When another tenement like it was built alongside, each inside room had a window on a narrow air shaft between them. This became the standard plan for tenements. By 1900, the island of Manhattan alone had over 40,000 buildings of this type, and they held over 1.5 million people. A prize-winning plan had produced the world's prize slum. The air shaft between the buildings was only 28 inches wide, so narrow that it did not really bring in light. Instead, the foul air brought up smells from the garbage accumulating at the bottom. If there was a fire, the air shafts became flues that quickly inflamed all the rooms around. The noise of quarreling neighbors resounded up the air shaft. There was no privacy. 4 families shared the primitive plumbing in the hallway on each floor, and these rooms bred flies and germs. Sometimes the toilets became so disgusting that the tenants would not use them. Then they depended on the plumbing at work or at school. There were no bathtubs with running water. Nearly every one of these tenement houses had at least one sufferer from tuberculosis, and in some there were 20 or more. In 1900, when he was governor of New York, Theodore Roosevelt appointed a commission to report on the tenement house slums. They were not at all surprised that these buildings festered with poverty, disease, and crime. But they were surprised that, in spite of it all, so many people raised there managed to become decent and self-respecting. And they reported that the slums were even worse than they had been 50 years before. Slum neighborhoods had names like Misery Lane and Murderer's Alley, hardly the America that thousands of hopeful immigrants had been looking for.